Hi, my name is John, and this is Business Update. In this week's episode, we'll be talking about a recent development that I was surprised to find out despite the debacle when it was first launched. I'm talking none other than Cyberpunk 2077, and in this latest iteration or in this particular article, it mentions that there has been plans on creating a sequel already despite the troubled launch and continued launch. That it just goes to show that they prematurely released a game that was not all not was not finished, a full version. It was an early beta at best that would entice more people to consider purchasing the game. And lo and behold, 2 years later, before interestingly enough, those naysayers or pissed off fans of cyberpunk, not fans of CD Project Red, is now coming back, which is good in a sense for the company, but for me it's a terrible signal that it emboldens a lot of companies to continue using this type of model by releasing crappy games, unfinished games, and then saying that we'll polish it once we've given more time. So instead of spending, let's say you're supposed to finish it in 5 years or 10 years, whatever the years may be, they'll launch it a few years earlier, which is a terrible sign of things to come. And obviously they've been slightly pushing what the boundary is all about, what's acceptable to the gamers. And with the advent of microtransactions, pay to win concept, it's becoming worse and worse. And up to a certain threshold, when gamers get pissed off, they would stop playing those games, and those companies will suffer the consequences in the long run. But for the meantime, we're stuck to what the situation here is. So let's take a look here. According to PCGamer.com, the sequel that is planned for Cyber 2077 has to learn from the mistakes that they made, several mistakes at that, of what happened in the first release. Now, obviously, there are pros, benefits of what they were offering here, but none more so than no game is perfect. So consider it. Now, in this case, they're calling the sequel, the Orion is the code name for the next Cyberpunk game. So how they improve upon it, obviously, should learn from their mistake here. So let's start with the first one. Uh, okay. So the first learning experience is never release a game if it's not completed or finished version. So if they were to just mention that it was only early access or a beta release, and I think gamers would have been more amendable that it's still in development. You can maybe see the first part of the game, the initial part, or the stage one, or chapter one level, or whatever you want to call it, so that people has a bird's eye view of what to expect in terms of the gameplay mechanics, the visuals, and everything. I think everyone would have been fine. But greedy as the management or the decision makers, you don't blame the developers, because obviously you can only develop the game up to a certain point at a reasonable time. And even if the management keep on pushing, and this is the result that you got. And what's worse is they knew that this was not a finished game, and yet they took the risk, and risk the ire of the many fans. And in this case, even Sony came into the picture and said, you can return, we will return the money that you bought if you bought it digitally. And obviously it crippled their initial sales. But sad thing here is, it has somewhat recovered, and many players have started to play the game here. But again, once you realize that the game is somewhat a shell of what it could have been, so let's continue reading further. Next is this one. I think many would realize that yes, the open world genre is very interesting, and the wider the world, the more things you could do, the more places you could reach. I mean, akin to what I experienced is Breath of the Wild. It's an open world genre game that you can practically go anywhere as long as it's within the map. But the question here is, size doesn't mean anything, or the vastness of the area is nothing if there's no content that you can participate in. And same goes with this one. Build a smaller world, make it more compact, where there's more things to do. I mean, can you go to all the buildings that's in your world? I doubt it. Similar to how GTA works, not all facilities, buildings you can enter to and exit to or interact. And if you're talking of world open world experience, is being able to interact with individuals within those cities, interactions with in public or inside a building, or whatever facility it is, to make it more immersive. Uh, a game that comes to mind is Deus Ex, even though it's not a large open world game, but the size of the game is not the key part, but the interactions within that area is very compelling, that everything that you do can impact different segments of the open world that you're playing, and could impact your story itself, and branching out to different scenarios of a multitude of possible outcomes depending on the how you interact with with the world that you're playing with. Next is again, I think this is a very important part if you're trying to sell a game, is obviously a memorable character here. And what's interesting here, the main character is usurped by the sub character supposed to be, which was heavily marketed, which is played by none other than Keanu Reeves here. And obviously, for any single player type of game, the main character has to be believable, relatable, and has to be impactful so that the players can see themselves playing that character. Uh, Character springs to mind is Red Dead Redemption 2, even the first one, playing John Marston, or Mr. Arthur here in Red Dead Redemption 2, always is important. Another game that's important, like in Breath of the Wild, playing the character Link, a silent character at that, so that it conveys, you can project yourself to that main character. Another character, a female-led character that's very interesting is what do you call this? Horizon Zero Dawn, right? So playing the character, a protagonist, regardless it's male or female, is very important to do it right, so that it makes a compelling case when you're playing the game here. Even an unknown character in Dark Souls or Demon Souls, but you can relay yourselves into visualizing that what you could be if you were in that position here. And obviously creating a compelling character is very critical as well. Not just a what do you call this? A mannequin of stuff that you could just aesthetically change, but there's no impact to as to what the character can do or cannot do in the open world here. Next is, again, a lot of companies has been trying to discount that, yes, single player game is dying, which obviously that's not true with the even popularity of even more single player games. That's not to say that multiplayer games is not a viable option, but some companies trying to do too much will always set themselves up to fail. And companies that's good in multiplayer shouldn't venture in single player game unless you get the right people to do the right job. And in this case, Cyberpunk, or not Cyberpunk, but CD Projekt Red is known for creating a immersive single player game, and creating a multiplayer just to make a quick buck is as a recipe for disaster. And the fact that you don't even offer it up to now is very telling of the capability, the limitations of what you can and cannot do. So never overpromise something. It's better to under promise or under advertise, so that if you were to offer more, then that would be a big plus for your big fans. In the case of Spider-Man, right? I mean, all of the things that they offered and a lot more, they give it for free for download, the DLC and whatnot. And that's the value that the gamers will play, and they will continue to support it. Not more so than the Miles Morales, because it's like a similar game with a different character of sorts or different personality here, but the gameplay in itself is practically the same there. But going back here, so the key here is, hopefully they'll learn their lesson and not try to do too much. I mean, focusing on the single player alone is a very daunting task on itself already. So hopefully they'll rectify that in their next version. Yeah, another interesting thing that they mentioned in this article, so I want to share also is, the first person, genre is very interesting, obviously for a variety of reasons, but obviously playing a character if you cannot see it, so having a third person view similar to when they did the Witcher is very important, so that you can see, let's say, if you're upgrading your armaments, your armors, your costumes, so that it makes sense as to what you're building, whether it's your weapons or your armors that you're building here. And having that option to go third person should be incorporated in your gameplay here, similar to your what do you call this? Similar in your Witcher series, and even in what do you call this? The Elder Scrolls series, you'll be able to play first person view or third person view here, so that fans or gamers should be given that option and let them decide how they want to play, not fixate on a very narrow point of view, and it limits the option of who can play and why should they play or spend their money in terms of playing your game here. And obviously, at the end of the day, given all of those things, hopefully they'll learn their lessons. And it's not just for CD Projekt Red, but for many game publishers, which very disappointing nowadays. And if you were to see the many games that has been published nowadays, very few games, right? Now, maybe with the exception of Elden Ring, that did justice to how an open world, RPG type of game should have been done in the first place. So others should look onto that how popular the game is. A lot of gamers supported it and even bought the games multi-platform. If done it right, in my personal experience, if I like the game in one platform and if I want to continue playing, whether it's in console or portable mode, I'll buy the game several times over. And if it's terrible game, word of mouth, I will not recommend it to other people. And why would you spend your hard-earned money on a terrible game, an unfinished game, and promises? That's why the concept of pre-order should be thrown away, because it's trying to convince you to pay upfront so that they can generate that revenue quickly, despite the limitations or false advertisement that they're doing, and they're not being punished for their miscalculation, which is kind of disappointing here. So obviously the consumers are disadvantaged and we lose out, and it emboldens those companies to do those bad practices over and over again. And we'll see what will happen when will they launch the sequel to Cyberpunk 2077. Hopefully it's for the better rather than for the worse here. But they've lost a lot of loyal fans over the course of that debacle here. Anyway, come back again on Wednesday for more business update. As always, I'll see you in the next one. Take care.